stream on the morning or the afternoon, the day after a spectacular Ukrainian strike on an oil terminal in St. Petersburg, as well as some Russian military facilities on the Kronstadt island just off St. Petersburg, which is the hometown of the Russian leader Vladimir Putin, on the opening day of the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, which is sometimes dubbed Russia's Davos, but basically it's a attempt to showcase the economic potential of the Russian Federation to foreign investors. And those foreign investors, the few that showed up, would have seen smoke billowing from the port of St. Petersburg in a country that's in recession and probably thought twice about investing their dollars, yen, renminbi, whatever currency it is, into the Russian economy. And that is the strategic aim of these strikes in part. Of course, Ukraine wants to hit these oil terminals to reduce the amount of money that can fuel, pun intended, the Russian war machine to attack us here in Ukraine. And things are just going from bad to worse for Vladimir Putin. And it now becomes a question of how long is he, number one, going to last? And number two, how long is this current war here in Ukraine going to last as well? Привit, if you're new to this channel, this is Inside Ukraine with me, Connor Klein. It's my second channel. I have the main channel, which deals with lifestyle in this region, the one I dubbed New Europe. And here I discuss geopolitics. I have a background in international relations with a specialization in this region. I speak both Russian and Ukrainian. And Ukrainian is starting to catch up with my Russian at this point. And I've been on and off in this region for over a decade. And I've spent probably about 50% of the 2022 to 2026 period of the extended invasion, Russian invasion of Ukraine, here actually on the ground in Ukraine. So I am indeed inside Ukraine. I'm outside the world famous Odessa Opera House. You can see it in the background behind me. I'm wearing a top, which is as close as I can get to St. Petersburg. Obviously, I don't have any Russian or St. Petersburg tops in my closet, but I do have the Estonian one, and that is the closest place, I guess, in the free world to St. Petersburg, or maybe Finland. Somewhere Finland's closer. But nonetheless, this is what I thought would be appropriate to discuss the latest part of Russia's train wreck invasion of Ukraine is the fact that they are getting struck on important days by what we've now dubbed the Ukrainian sanctions regime, which is basically to blow up the oil and energy facilities in Russia that generate the income and also supply directly the Russian war machine to wage terror here on Ukrainians with their illegal war of imperial revanchism. So this event in St. Petersburg has echoes of the May 9th parade in Moscow, where Vladimir Putin was reduced to effectively calling Donald Trump and trying to cajole him into or encourage him into putting pressure on the Ukrainian president Zelensky to not bomb his parade, where he's supposed to show off his strength as a strong man. And basically, he had some North Koreans walk across the square with some Russian soldiers, no military hardware, and then he scuttled off to his lair, presumably where he felt safer after, can't remember how many, maybe it was 40 minutes, but I actually think it was less. I watched through it, but there was maybe a speech for about 20 minutes. I think he was there for less than an hour with no military hardware, and it was incredibly unimpressive. It's a bit of a case of the emperor has no clothes. He's trying to continue to claim that Russia big, Russia winning, but then you can't hold your May 9 parade for fear that the Ukrainians will disturb it with their drone attacks. But their drone attacks did ruin the St. Petersburg Economic Forum because, well, if you're a foreign investor, as I said, and you show up and you see, as soon as you see black smoke billowing from the oil terminal at the port, then you realize, not so sure that it's a wise decision to be invested in this country since the Ukrainians might hit it as strategic infrastructure at some point, depending what you're doing. So another humiliation for Vladimir Putin. And the big question is, for how much longer can the Russian leadership and the Russian elite continue to take big L's with this train wreck of invasion? Were they really planning that it would be 3 days? Well, certainly they weren't planning it would go longer than 3 months. And it is now well over 4 years since the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine. They started the war in 2014 with the illegal annexation of Crimea and starting this low intensity conflict in Donbass by occupying parts of through their separatist proxies in Luhansk and Donetsk. And if we look at it in its entirety, we're now more than 12 years later, and they still have not taken all of the Donbass region, which is Luhansk and Donetsk. And the current prediction is that it's pretty hard to predict at the current pace when they'd ever take it. It will definitely be 5 to 10 years at this point. So not really a realistic time frame. And I love to quote Igor Girkin because he's a Russian ultranationalist on the opposite side, should be sitting in prison as a war criminal, but instead he's sitting in a Russian prison because he's outspoken. He's an outspoken critic of how Vladimir Putin has been conducting this war. So apparently, Putin hasn't gone as far as what he did with Navalny by obviously murdering him, but at least so far. But he's there, has to have him cornered off in a prison so that he doesn't do a Prigozhin on it and launch some sort of mutiny against him. And he has said that at this point, well, first he said last year that basically Russia had almost no chance of winning the war at this stage and achieving their strategic goals. It was either going to be some sort of frozen conflict for a while, where both sides tried to rearm and undermine the other, maybe probably to restart the war at some future juncture, or Ukraine would just take back all their territory eventually. And that was last year. Now this year, he says even if Putin goes for a new mobilization of Russian men and sends lots of men to military against their will, it still won't work because it's too late, basically. He's basically screwed the whole thing up and effectively called him a loser. And that is the basis in which we're working on because Vladimir Putin doesn't really have any good options. That's why we see more and more escalation, and we can continue to see more escalation. I'll talk about that in the next live stream in more detail, what his options for escalation are. But as you see, he just continues to take big L's since 2023 to now. They've had this strategy of paying a lot of money to recruit more or less or some of them come from prisons, but basically encourage poor Russians to sign up. They don't have a very long life expectancy if they do. And that has been kind of the social contract as well as the actual formal contract in terms of paying them to do that. They burned through their stocks of Soviet era materiel. In fact, now they're trying to get the stocks from apparently Afghanistan that were left by the Soviets, so they can try to refurbish them to use them because they're so desperate they're running out of stuff. This is all what I predicted back in 23 would happen towards in the second half of 2025. Their economy is effectively in recession. They can pretend it's not, but it basically has been since second half of last year, and it's only going to get worse and worse for the Russian economy. There is now, for the first time, I think as a member of the Duma, actually, who criticized, I think it was from the Communist Party, which sounds ironic, but they're kind of permitted opposition in Russia, suggesting that they don't have the money to continue with this. They don't have the money in the budget for the war expenditures, and basically they're going to have to wrap it up pretty soon. And that is the direction it's going because they make almost no progress on the front lines. Net, they don't seem to be gaining any territory. They are gaining a little bit around Kostovonika in the Donbass region, but they're losing some in the Zaporizhia Oblast. And to make it a strategic achievement, one could be conquering all of the Donbass region, saying, in inverted commas, that they liberated it and then calling it a day. However, as I said, it'll probably take 5 to 10 years of the current progress if they could ever manage to conquer those cities, because it's like a fortress spell. So when you go through one, you're going to have to go through the next. And it's going to come at a huge cost in terms of personnel and material and, well, not so much material, but probably just manpower to do that. And all the time, the Russian economy is getting weaker and weaker and weaker, undermining the foundations of the Russian state. So this is a massive problem because without a strategic achievement, I'm not so sure that Vladimir Putin can actually stop the war. And we'll discuss that in another video about escalation, because I think he's going to have to escalate somewhere else in order to try and get a strategic achievement. One could be, of course, attacking member state and underlying Article 5, but there are other options. And if you look at what he's achieved so far in the war, you could argue that creating a land bridge from Russia de jure all the way down to the Crimean Peninsula that is illegally occupied was a strategic achievement. The problem is that the main road, which is what makes it a land bridge, is now under Ukrainian drone control. It makes it very hard to actually transport anything there. and actually use the land bridge. And then the actual physical bridge is also undermined for military purposes apparently at the moment because it's been so badly weakened by previous Ukrainian strikes. So it's kind of arguable whether they really have that. I mean, on paper, they still occupy it. If the Ukrainians were to continue to gnaw away at territory there, they could actually become undone. And we could even see that one strategic achievement, even though it's pretty minor, be undone in this phase of the war, which would basically put Vladimir Putin back at square one, but just with a wrecked economy and no Soviet era stocks to call on. And on top of it, of course, they'll have who knows how many soldiers are dead or injured in the Russian side in this war. It's probably over 1 million at this point. So wouldn't have the capacity to just make the military probably for another 5 to 10 years to recover from it. So basically, the trajectory of the war has pretty decisively turned in favor of Ukraine. Now, does that mean that Russia can cause lots of havoc here before they finally either have to have an end to hostilities or actually lose the war outright? Of course they can, but that's increasingly an indication more desperation than anything else, and could end up hastening Russia's decline and their collapse in the war if they start targeting just civilians, for example, because they could have, with those munitions, of course, targeted actual military installations here in Ukraine, which actually have a bigger impact on the war. And the psychology, from what I can see here in Ukraine, is that all these terrorist attacks by Russia on civilians just make Ukrainian resistance even stiffer and remind people exactly what they're fighting against, which is Russian terror, and which would be even worse under occupation. So, to sum up, we've seen Russia's showcase for economic investment completely undermined by the psychological element of this attack by Ukraine on their energy and military installations in the St. Petersburg region. It's not by accident that they hit this on the morning when all these dignitaries, the few that went there, including, I think, one representative from the Trump administration, the first time since the 2022 invasion, which just shows which side of the bread they butter. They butter that side of the bread, because here we had recently the Black Sea Security Forum, and I didn't see any representative from the Trump administration whatsoever. I saw Mark Burns, who's is it Mark Burns? Yeah, he's this pastor who is at least marketed as Trump's spiritual advisor. He's here and he's very pro-Ukrainian. But besides him, I didn't see anyone who's identifiably MAGA who came here to support Ukraine. But apparently they sent someone over to the Economic Forum in St. Petersburg who got to see at firsthand exactly how sanctions work, the Ukrainian sanctions, attacking this oil terminal, causing this explosion, demonstrating to everybody who's two eyes who can look out the window and see exactly what state the Russian investment climate is in. Pretty bad, and I wouldn't be putting my money into Russia unless you happen to be pro-Russian. Then I guess put it in there, and you'll probably end up losing it. So then they'll have a little bit of Schadenfreude when everything goes south. But jokes aside, the trajectory means that the attempts by the Russian government and Vladimir Putin to showcase Russia for future investment, another black day for that, as they are hit quite literally in the center of St. Petersburg, their energy and military facilities, and just demonstrates how much of a paper tiger the Russian Federation is if they can't even protect the second city of the country, Vladimir Putin's hometown, on the opening day of the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. So if you have any questions or any comments, drop them down below. Let me just go and have a look. I had to put back on the shades, but then it's always hard to read this. Okay, that's just my opening message. If you're new to this channel, I have my guide. If you're coming here to Ukraine, not only we give you the logistical advice and a little bit of the history and the background to Ukraine and this war, but also you'll get a hospitality guide with my favorite cafes, restaurants, bars, clubs, and shisha lounges for the city of Odessa, the capital Kyiv, Lviv in the west, and also in the west of Ukraine, Chernihiv, and Uzhhorod. Those are the 5 most popular cities to visit. I may be going to other cities in this country pretty soon. I missed out actually with the Black Sea Security Council trip to go to Mykolaiv and actually into Kherson Oblast, unfortunately, but I may do that in any case pretty soon. And I don't know, the air alert just went off, and I can't remember if that will knock out the audio here or not. I think it might. So on that note, since I can't tell if it will have knocked out, oh, is there? Comment there. Russian. It's always very hard to read this with the glare. Let's just see if I can read it from here. Russian. Mexican. I know. Oh no, it's actually for some reason translated it. I don't know why that is. Session befinden, aber wenn wir so wäre, ich with this. Okay, I see a comment there for me. It's coming up in German. I don't know if that's because it did a auto translate. Yeah. Okay, so there's a comment there saying that Russia's in a recession, but he would be in a depression if he were Russian. Well, for sure, because things are only going to get worse in that country as we go forward. And that is the direction of traffic and air traffic. So, anyways, I have a air alert here. And on this beautiful day in Odessa, Mama, things are looking brighter and brighter from the Ukrainian point of view. The Ukrainian uh, head of the president's office, Budanov, used to be head of intelligence here, has recently said that there's indications that the war might end in the winter, or at least the fighting might stop. So, on that optimistic note, I will say Slava Ukraini, Param Slava, and Do Peremohi, and for many more bad days for the Russian economy in the coming months, and ultimately Russia's war machine. And can't wait to see Russia's defeat in the Russo-Ukrainian war. Ciao, ciao. See you later.